All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. We are well into a new event series for November. So this is the first time we've kind of pulled together a series of live events around paleontology, archaeology, and geology. If you want to find the full listing of events, you can head to exploringbytheseat.com. You can find them all there. We also had a new newsletter go out over the weekend, so you can check out those offerings and register to hang out with your classrooms. But today we're going to continue on with a really cool event, and we're kind of heading out a ways here from North America to spend a little time with Dr. Louise Leakey. She's a paleontologist and National Geographic Explorer at large. She's actually a third-generation paleoanthropologist who found her first hominid fossil at age 5. So I don't know if anyone's ever done that earlier. She's the director of public education and outreach for the Turkana Basin Institute. She splits her time between fieldwork near Lake Turkana in Kenya and more administrative work in the Kenyan capital of Nairobi. So in addition to her long-term field studies in Kenya, she also works closely with local communities and wildlife authorities to preserve and protect the country's unique flora and fauna. So we're kind of catching Louise kind of in between some time in the field. So she's still out at the station right now, but she's going to be heading into Nairobi for some of that administrative work that we just mentioned. So I'm going to reach backstage, see if we can grab her in with us. Hey, Louise, how are you?
I'm well. How are you? Nice to see you.
Yeah, good. It's great to have you here with us. Last time we were hanging out in person, but I think it's pretty cool with technology. We can kind of reach across the ocean like this between continents.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm actually at Lake Turkana at the moment. I'm standing on the east side, quite far north. And this is where a lot of the work has happened since 1968, actually. So it's been a lot of field work every year, and huge numbers of fossils have been found, both of animals and also some fossils of our human ancestors. So this is where I am. I'm actually standing at the Turkana Basin Institute at a place called Ilaret. And hopefully later on in this little session, we'll have a little walk around some of the labs, show you some of the fossils that have been found here as well. But for now, yeah, let's have some background as well. What would you like to hear from me?
Yeah, perfect. Well, we're looking forward to some exploration, but before, let's do a little storytelling. So, Louise, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and, your family's history in the area?
Okay, so my let's go back to my grandparents. My grandparents were Louis and Mary Leakey, and actually they started their work at Olduvai Gorge. That's where they really put Africa on the map as a place where you can really look for evidence of human origins. And when they first started exploring in the 30s, mid 30s, the conventional thinking was to look for evidence of fossils of human ancestors outside of Africa, because they had found Neanderthals in Europe. They had found fossils of Homo erectus in Java and in China. And so nobody really thought that Africa would contribute very much to this story. And so they were really up against a brick wall when it came to finding support for their work. So they worked on a shoestring budget. But my grandfather, Louis, had been to Olduvai and he'd seen lots of stone tools and fossils coming out of the eroded hillsides of this gorge. And he was convinced if he kept going back there, eventually he was going to find the fossils that would belong maybe to the ancestors who were making those stone tools. And he felt that that site was actually considerably older. So it was in 1959 when my grandmother, Mary Leakey, walked down into Olduvai, into the gorge, and she spotted some shiny black teeth eroding out of the hillside. And this excavation took place, and they uncovered a complete skull, ultimately, of something they then called Zinjanthropus boisei, and it was dated to 1.75 million years, which made it a lot older than the things that had been found outside of Africa, which meant that it put Africa on the map, and that really marked the beginning of a lot of the work that then continued. And so my parents were Richard and Maeve Leakey, and they started their exploration in the northern part of the Turkana Basin, which Lake Turkana is this very long, skinny desert lake. It's 160 miles in length, and it takes me a whole hour to fly my little 206 from the south end of that lake to the north end of the lake. So it's big. And in the past, a slow moving river that drained out of the Ethiopian highlands meandered its way through this basin, through this depression, and water coming out of the highlands, forming these lakes and rivers that sort of shrunk and grew over time. And the rivers flowing into the lake carries sediment that buries the fossils in this region. So it becomes a very rich area for a fossil exploration. So they started exploring in the Omo Valley, which is just to the north of Lake Turkana, and found fossils. And one day, when he was flying up the eastern side of Lake Turkana to get to the Omo Valley, my father looked out of the window on the eastern shoreline and saw what looked like fossil exposures and fossil deposits. And so he decided to go in and begin his work on the eastern side of Lake Turkana, and that was in 1968. And that really, they found a first skull then when they were exploring using camels to get themselves further inland. And they really decided this was a place that would keep them, and it has done. And as a result of that, fieldwork has taken place every single year at sites in the Turkana Basin, either the west side or the eastern side of this lake. And I continue to lead a team of fossil hunters for 8 months of the year here at Lake Turkana. And we continue to find fossils of human ancestors, as well as all the animals that coexisted across these landscapes, going back from the last 4,000 years, really, to the last 4, 5, 6 million years or thereabouts. Depending on what pockets you're looking in, you're looking in different ages of deposits. So it's an extremely rich fossil area, hugely exciting to explore. And for us, it's the teams on the ground that are drawn from the local communities here that do the work to find the fossils. And the more trained eyes that we have out looking for fossils, the better success we have of finding them. So I currently lead the teams here, but I'm not so good at finding the fossils. But it's, as I've always said, it's teamwork. This would never happen if it was an individual. It's a big team of people that contribute to this extraordinary understanding and discovery of fossils that help us understand our past.
Okay. And then, so it is important to have that big team. The field work's obviously really important because you're making these amazing finds. But for the classrooms we have tuning in here who might be unfamiliar with field work and what it takes to
Yeah.
find a fossil and then get it out of the ground, can you talk a little bit about field work?
Yeah, so fieldwork, well, firstly, let's just say that Lake Turkana is quite hot. So we're often over 40 degrees centigrade. So what is that in Fahrenheit? Joe, have you got that? It's over the hundreds anyway. And we basically walk over these hillsides where you've had natural erosion that has slowly exposed bones that were buried once upon a time deep underground. And so once they get eroded out and onto the surface, we have to walk over these sites to find them. So to do that, we need to be quite mobile. So we've got a mobile tented camp where we have inverter and solar panels for power. We have a little Starlink dish for internet these days. In the past, we actually used to have to sling an aerial between two trees and hook up an HF radio to a car battery and try to get online in the evening for about half an hour to see if we could actually connect with the outside world to see if we could find out who was coming up and in a little aeroplane or whether we needed to order some supplies. So nowadays communication is considerably easier. And like I'm here talking to you, that would never have been possible just sort of 20 years ago. And then we get up first thing in the morning. We're out looking for fossils by 7 o'clock in the morning. It gets super hot midday. So that's when we stop working till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we will generally work again till about 5 when we come back to camp and have tea and food and an early night in tents where they're very basic tents that are a little frame and a mattress on the floor so that we're mobile. So you can roll up your mattress and put it on the top of the car and then we can move camp quite easily. We often get our water from dry sand rivers. They're little aquifers in the sand and you can dig away the sand and getting down to a level where you can use a cup and actually the water seeps into the hole and then you can put that into a bucket and fill a drum and that sort of feeds the camp. So you always have teams keeping the camp fed and watered and then people out looking for fossils as well. So yeah, that's camp life. It's wonderful. It's peaceful. Always the evenings under the stars are very magical, lots of wildlife around, little, often very many snakes. Like you have rattlesnakes in the States, we have these things called saw-scale vipers, and they sound just like a rattlesnake. They rub their scales together and they go shh, and you can hear them before you see them. So we've got to be very careful about snake bite. The other nasty things we have around are scorpions. Um, Spitting cobras sometimes. So we got to be a little bit careful when we're wandering around at night. And we have a rule in camp that everybody has to wear closed shoes and wear and walk around with a flashlight in the evenings, just to make sure that we do our best not to get bitten. But in the past, people roll over and may have, if they didn't zip their tent up properly, actually can roll onto a snake and get a bite. So um, it's a long way from any capital city or any medical support. We're a 3-day drive from Nairobi, the capital here. So we really are quite remote. But it's wonderful. I absolutely adore fieldwork. And although I would prefer to spend a lot more time in the field, I come and go using my little aeroplane. It's a single engine 6-seater that gets me to and from Nairobi, bringing in supplies and other scientists to join the team. So that's sort of field life for us. Very special indeed.
Okay, very cool. Well, we know a little bit about the area. We know about the field work, and maybe now's the time to explore a little bit of what happens after you get the fossils out of the ground. So maybe we can explore some of the labs and see some of the fossils.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wander back in towards the institute, and I'll flip my camera around, and so you can then see some of the fossils. And I'll keep chatting. See if we can just flip that over.
So I think, Louise, you might have accidentally hit the. Oh, there we go. Yep,
There we
perfect.
go. All right.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so actually, here's a little corridor of the lab at the Turkana Basin Institute, and I'm going to walk you into sort of like a holding room where when we collect a fossil, we actually coat it. If it's a big fossil, we coat it in a plaster jacket. So you'll see many of the things in here are covered in a white jacket. These are big animals. Um, Here we've actually got, believe it or not, a kudu, which is an antelope, and it has its horns are going up that way. Um, and then this is a very impressive fossil here. You can all see what that is. That is a very large crocodile. That's called a broad-nosed crocodile. It's probably about 1.8 million years old. And you can see at the back here, all of its scutes. It's all the crocodile scutes. These are these bony plates on the back of the crocodile. Very large animal indeed. Other kinds of crocodiles as well. And then down this little row, from all the way up there down here, you've got lots and lots of hippo skulls. Often, this was obviously because of the rivers and lakes in this region in the past, there was an abundance of hippos, and they're quite well preserved, and often they have their upper or lower jaws, or sometimes their tusks preserved. See another hippo. You can see its teeth here. This one's actually got its backbone intact with its skull there. And then we have a most impressive set of elephant long bones. So this is actually a femur. You can see it looks like a big elephant. I want to show you a big elephant skull too. These are all elephant lower jaws that you have here. So there's so many fossils. And I'm going to end in the room that actually has some of the skulls of our human ancestors. So I'll just race around here first. See those elephants? So that's actually the skull of an ancestral Asian elephant. And they were more abundant in this part of the world than the ancestral African elephants, like you see here. This is a huge skull where you can see where its tusks would have come out the front. It's upside down, so it's the top of its head is underneath it. And then they've got these very massive tooth rows here. An elephant has 6 sets of teeth in its lifetime. And so you can see this here is one tooth, it's one big molar, and they come forward in the mouth and they chip away at the front. And when an elephant gets to its 6th tooth and it runs out of that, then it doesn't have anything else to chew with. So it sort of, that becomes the end of its life. So yeah, this room is full of all sorts of fossils that are either being worked on or were taken into the lab, and where they've cleaned away the plaster and they've used air scribes to get all the sediment. This is another lab here that is full of trays and trays of fossils of smaller animals, but there's some fun things to show you here. There's a box which has a whole collection of monkey skulls. So you've got skulls of a very large monkey here, Rhinocolobus. This is actually a giant baboon, Therapithecus. And here's looks like a female as well, female monkey. So that's quite neat, those monkeys. And then here we have a rhino skull. We had both black and white rhinos in the fossil record here. This is a fun thing. You can see what this is. This is actually a tortoise. Obviously a lot of tortoises. And in fact, when I was a 12-year-old, we dug up the carapace of a giant tortoise, and it was the size of a bath. You could have had a bath in it. It was so big. So a lot of giant tortoises as well in this region. These are a whole array of different antelopes with their horns. Here we have a pig skull, another pig skull, and then some slender snouted crocodiles. Look at this thing. It's a long-nosed crocodile, very skinny nose. A crocodile's body is 7 times the length of its head, and this skull is over 1 meter long. Here's another one, similarly sized. So there were some very big crocodiles in this part of the world. So many different species of crocodiles, many different species of elephants. We have birds. We even have snakes. I'll show you. Actually, we have a beautiful snake here. I'll quickly show you that before we go back to the hominid room. And under here, we have the bones. I don't know how clear it is to see, but coiled up in here, you've actually got lots of vertebrae of a very large snake. It's quite hard to know how we're going to actually get that out of the ground. I think what we're going to do with this one is put it into a camera, sort of a CT scanner, and image it and try to then work out what we got before we try and dig it out with microscopes. So yeah, a lot of fossils in the collections here, and there's even more in the collections in Nairobi. So it's a sort of area where we hold the fossils, but these fossils belong to Kenya. They don't belong to us as individuals. We have the luxury of working on them for a certain amount of time before we publish them. But other than that, we hold them here while they're studied. In this cupboard, you've actually got some casts. These are actually replicas of different skulls of human ancestors. Okay, so there's different ones here. But I would like to just share a couple with you. Here on the table, we spoke about Zinjanthropus. This is the skull that was found by my grandparents. It's actually a copy, it's a replica, because the original is actually in Tanzania, in the museum there. But this was the thing that they called the Nutcracker Man, because it had these very, very large teeth, and it would have had a very large lower jaw, and that lower jaw needed a big muscle to power it, and the muscle attached to this ridge along the top of the skull here. So it's a sagittal crest. So that's the skull of Zinjanthropus. And the very first skull that they found at Lake Turkana was this one here. And this was what they called 406, but you can see it's the same species. It has the sagittal crest running along the top of the skull, although this one didn't have any teeth. At 1.8 million years or thereabouts. And then the very famous skull that was found the year I was born in 1972 was this thing. You can see it belongs to a different species. It has no sagittal crest, and it has a much bigger brain. So it lies on our own genus, the genus Homo. And this is known as Homo rudolfensis, that skull. And there are many other things in here, and we're still working to find more bones and long bones as well of all these different animals, these human ancestors. And there's still many mysteries that need to be resolved as to where these things came from if you go back in the fossil record. So yeah, that's fun. These are some of the trays that we brought in from and fossils that we brought in from the field today. Actually, we've been working a big excavation of a fossil, a skeleton that we found, which is quite unusual to find skeletons. In fact, some of these belong to monkeys. So yeah, it's been an exciting 6 weeks while we've been doing the work there. I'm going to flip the screen around if I can again, front camera, and see if it comes on. There we are. I'm back.
Perfect.
So that's a little run around the lab here. Yeah. So if there's any specific questions you want me to elaborate on anything, let me know.
Yeah, of course. Let's switch to some Q&A action. So those who are tuning in, don't be shy to use the chat sidebar. Send us in some questions for Louise, and we will get those questions answered for you. And I've got a few here to get us started. So the first question I have is about the fossils that you have there. Just a comment that there's so many fossils there. So do they stay there long term? Can anybody kind of reach out to you and ask to come and study and look at them? How does that work?
So there are lots and lots of them, but until they're actually cleaned and taken out of plastic jackets and accessioned, they're quite hard to study. But we put them into big databases, and then generally speaking, we try to find experts to come in. So if there's a monkey expert, they'll come in and look at all the monkeys, the unpublished monkeys, and then try to write these up in a volume or in a publication, because there's absolutely no point having these things just stashed on shelves. They need to be published so that they can then become part of databases. So, but we always like to get more experts involved. And so there's lots of room for work to be done.
All right. The next question I have here is from Miss Rahim's class, who are joining us, and they're wondering a two-part question. They want to know what is the biggest fossil that you've uncovered, and then they're also wondering how old they get. What's the oldest fossil that has been recovered?
Okay, so the biggest fossil I would imagine is probably that elephant I showed you, the big elephant skull of the African elephant. It was very difficult to get out of the ground. When we found it, the only thing that was exposed was the tooth. And then we didn't know how much of the skull was going to be there. And we dug ourselves deeper and deeper into this big hole and then thought, oh my goodness, how are we going to lift this thing? So eventually we actually had to build a metal um, frame that we could then hang a pulley, a block and tackle off.
Yeah.
And then we were able to lift it in its plaster jacket and drive a car underneath it and then take it out of the field that way. So that was probably the heaviest one. There have been other bigger um, fossils in a sense that they were complete skeletons that were lifted by places, somehow digging a frame of wood underneath them, but that wasn't done by my team. In terms of the age of the fossils in the Turkana Basin, surprisingly, we actually have a little pocket of late Cretaceous, so 80 million year old deposits on the very northwestern side of the lake. There's a range of hills that you can see from where I'm sitting now, and they're dinosaur bones in there. So they're quite hard to work. They're quite remote, and they're not these beautiful, complete dinosaur skeletons that you find in some parts of the Americas. Here, this is quite a high energy environment, so you do find complete limb bones, but we haven't found anything articulated there. Those are worked by a man who was at the Denver Museum for a while. I don't think they're currently being studied, but that's the oldest deposits. But we also have sites that are 30 million years in age, and we've got sites that go from 17 million through to the last 6 million years. But the age that is of most interest to my team are deposits that go from 6 million to the last million years or so. And that's because that is the time period that represents where our ancestors were upright walking. So we have a common ancestor with chimpanzees, the ancestors of modern day chimpanzees, at around about 6 million years or thereabouts. And so, what we're trying to uncover here is what's going on in the fossil record between that time period. There are deposits that are actually more recent. The last high stand of this big lake here was about 10,000 years ago.
Mhm.
And there are also deposits that represent sort of what was going on in the Lake Basin at that time as well. So there really is a huge range of ages, and depending on what time period you're interested in, as a paleontologist or as a geologist, you can pretty much find the sites to explore.
Okay. So the next question I have here is for some sixth graders, and they're curious about you talk about the periods you're looking for and the ages of some of the fossils. So they're wondering, what are some of the clues that help you determine how old a fossil is?
Okay, that's a great question. So when we are collecting fossils in this part of the world, just picking up a fossil and then putting it in the lab's not going to help you very much because you've taken it out of context, and the context is absolutely key to knowing how old the fossil is, because the way we date things here is we know the ages or the dates of specific volcanic ash horizons. And those volcanic ashes that were laid down by all the volcanic activity in the Rift Valley here, they contain these little glass crystals, these feldspar crystals, which you can use a radiometric dating technique to work out the accurate age of those horizons. Those horizons also have a very unique chemistry, and so you can get the geochemical signature, if you like, that will allow you then, just from the geochemistry, to identify a dated tuff or a dated volcanic ash. And so the fossil layers we place above and below those dated fossil layers. And so we've mapped extensively all the different ash horizons. And there are these geological maps now of all the sites in the Turkana Basin that allow you to know what age you're actually exploring in. And when they started working here in the late 60s, they had no idea how old the sites were. And so it was absolutely key that when they picked something up, they marked exactly where it was picked up from. And so to do that, they used aerial photographs flown from an airplane that were about 10 kilometers squared. And you would then look at this black and white photograph and work out exactly where you were standing in it, which is a tiny little point, and you would then use a pin and push a hole through and write the number of the fossil that you picked up on the back of the photograph. And so many of the fossils collected throughout the 60s, late 60s, 70s, 80s, and actually into the 90s were all collected that way before we had accurate GPS handheld receivers. And also now, of course, you've got GPS and geolocation on your telephone, as well as a camera. And it's a whole lot easier now when you collect a fossil to know exactly where it comes from. So it's a super question, because you're absolutely right. You can't just pick things up. It's absolutely key knowing how old these things are. And to do that, you need to put it in context to the sediments and the hillsides around.
Okay. We've got Miss Colclo's class joining us, and they're wondering, we saw the crocodiles. What about other predators like lions? Do you find fossils of other predators?
Absolutely. So we find fossils of a large saber-toothed cat called Dinofelis. You've got Megatherium, this big lion that was around. You find different hyenas, little canids, little jackals, fossils of jackals and things. So all the things that you see in one of these African landscapes, savanna landscapes, today you find fossils of their ancestors. Some of these things looked a little bit different, or often were quite larger than the cats that you're seeing today. But they were very much around. And so if you were a human ancestor walking in these landscapes, it wasn't a particularly safe place to be. So they must have had groups, they must have had strategies to protect themselves. They also had stone tools, obviously, to allow them to access the protein. And I imagine that many of these human ancestors used tools, but possibly ran big carnivores off their kills. It's much easier to let the carnivores do the work of killing an animal, and then you can run them off and take over the kill and use the meat as protein if you've got stone tools to get into it.
All right, very cool. So they have a follow-up here. We saw lots of examples of different ancestors in the hominid room. So they're kind of wondering how many species or ancestors have you found at the site?
So the different ages, obviously you've got things that are ancestral to um, things that you find at, say, 1.5 million years. If you go back in time, you're going to find things that were ancestral to the hominins that you're finding at that time. So let's say at 2 million years, you've got Homo erectus, you've got Homo rudolfensis, you've got this little thing called Homo habilis, and then you've got the skull with the sagittal crest, the species called Paranthropus boisei. So at least four
Mhm.
here in East Africa. And then at that time in South Africa, you've got things that were not exactly the same as this. They were probably filling the same sort of ecological niche in that sort of habitat, but they didn't look quite the same as the things that you're finding up here. And then if you go back in time, say another earlier million years or so, you're trying to find things that are ancestral to the species at that time. So we've got something called Paranthropus ethiopicus, which is what they call the black skull, which is 1 million years earlier than Paranthropus boisei. And you go further back to 3.5 million years here at Lake Turkana, you've got something we call Kenyanthropus platyops, which is where we've also got the earliest stone tools known from a site on the west side of Lake Turkana. And if you go to 4.1 million years, you've got a different species here, which is called Australopithecus anamensis. So that's probably as far back as we've got hominids in the fossil record from Turkana. We've got a few isolated teeth from a site called Lothagam that are on the hominin fossil record. You've got earlier sites with lots of different primates, but that record of the human ancestors is sort of marked by those distinct species, which eventually Homo erectus evolves into archaic forms of our species in Africa. And our species emerges in Africa somewhere around between 300,000 years and 200,000 years ago. And then we leave Africa probably around about 160,000 years or thereabouts. So it's an amazing story, but we all come out of the African continent. This story happened here.
Yeah, pretty amazing. Okay, so Miss Rahim's class has followed up. There's lots of great questions here in the chat. So they're wondering, those crocodile fossils were huge. Can you put a best estimate on how many meters long those crocodiles might have been?
So I think the head's at about sort of 1.5 meters, probably about 6 meters, 6.5 meters. Some of them maybe a bit longer. They were big crocodiles.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you could do the maths with 1.5 meters to those euthecodons, there you've probably got 2 meter long skulls in some of the very big cases. So 8 meter long crocodiles.
Wow, over 20 feet. Big
They're
crocodiles.
big crocs. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so another question here about properly excavating, digging up a fossil. I imagine it runs quite a gamut depending on how much is already unearthed and how much you can see. So I guess maybe what's an easy dig time and how long can they extend?
Yeah. Good question. So when you find something on the surface, say you find a molar of a hominin, you don't know if it's fallen off something or it's been lying out on the surface for a very long time. And so often, if there's a fresh break, you're pretty sure there's something else that you might find. So what we do is we then sweep up everything from the surface and we put it through these screens, and you shake away all the dirt and you pick out all the big stones, and then you have to collect all the little bits that are fossil, and you sort through those to see if you might find any more of the fossil that you're actually looking for. So if there's any more hominid in there. So sometimes that can take only a day to do, but then you could end up with things that are much more difficult to excavate. And so sometimes we'll be digging something for a period of 9 months or 12 months, even, depending on how hard the surface is and how dispersed the fossil was at that site. So a site we're working at the moment, we're coming up to the 4th month of excavation on. We just published recently, you might have seen it in the news, a fossil about the hands of Paranthropus boisei. It was about 2 weeks ago, actually. And that site, we spent over 9 months excavating. So
Okay.
it really varies enormously. But we have a team of 15 excavators working day in, day out to do that work. So that gives you an idea of how much time goes into excavating any one fossil.
Okay. We'll do a couple more and then we'll let you go because I know you're getting ready to go back to Nairobi. And then hopefully next time we connect, maybe we can do it from the field in the new year, which will be fun. A two-parter here. Have you personally ever found any dinosaur fossils? And the second part is sticking with kind of the dinosaur bird connection. Do you find any bird fossils at the site, and are they bigger than present birds?
Yeah, excellent. So I've explored the dinosaur sites once, and I found a bit of dinosaur bones. So nothing terribly impressive. But yes, if you get into the sites where the dinosaurs are, you do find dinosaur bones. They're just not as pretty as the ones that I think you're imagining. We do find a lot of bird bones here. We've actually got a beautiful little skull and parts of a body of a songbird, but often we find limb bones of big water birds, sometimes find footprints of big water birds, big storks. There actually is a lot of bird in the fossil record. They're very delicate bones, though. Obviously, a bird, as you know, because it has to fly, has these very, very delicately built bodies, and so their bones have a big hollow space inside of them, and so when they're out on the surface and they get trampled on by a herd of goats, say, they break, and so they're quite delicate, so it's quite hard, but we do definitely find them.
So I want to, in this next question from this class, I'm going to change it slightly. They're wondering about the weight of something like the crocodile fossil, but I imagine that's hard because they go through such a change over time as they're fossilized. So can you get accurate weights from a fossil?
So the accurate weight of the actual animal, is that what you're interested in? Or do you want to know how heavy that skull is? I mean,
well, they do want to know how heavy
basically
the skull is, but I'm wondering if that changes due to the fossilization process as well.
Yeah, so when a bone is modern, it's very light by comparison. And as it mineralizes in it, the minerals are absorbed from the sediment that it's preserved in. It petrifies, it becomes rock. And so the fossils are very heavy, especially as when you get a big crocodile skull like that. It can take 4 people to lift it. Whereas if it were a modern day crocodile, you could pick it up on your own, no problem. But the other way you can actually estimate the size of an animal and also the body weight of an animal using limb proportions. And so you can actually use an equation and plug in a dimension, say of a length of a tibia or a length of an arm bone or a leg bone, and it will give you a pretty good estimate of the weight of that individual when it was alive.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's used to estimate body weights of all sorts of different species.
Okay. So I've got one last question for you before we say goodbye for today. And I think this is a fun one to wrap up on. Obviously, you're taking the fossils of the hominids from the ground. Of course, we learn about anatomy and things like that. But what about lifestyle? Are you learning anything about lifestyle based on the finds?
So, what's interesting here is that you're finding often quite fragmentary pieces of the original fossils. So we don't know much from the fossils themselves of the hominids, but when you find stone tools and things in the fossil record, the same levels that these hominids are coming from, you obviously imagine that they were using these tools. It gives you some indication that they were preying or eating meat or using tools to process or dig up, say, roots or tubers or things like that. It's hard to know specifically, but you're going to find more about lifestyles from the tools, I presume. We can tell that they were upright because of their limb proportions and the morphology of the bones. You can work out how tall they were, how fast they met, or there's their gait as well. So there are things you can tell about a species if you have certain bones of them. But it's pretty hard. We don't have burials here at that time period. And so there's not so much insight into that, unlike what Lee Berger's finding in some of the 200,000 year fossils in South Africa. And he's got surprising things he can say about Homo naledi from a cave site, the Rising Star site. But we don't have any caves like that in the Turkana Basin. It's open country, very exposed areas that fossils were preserved on floodplains by the rivers and the lakes that were in this region rather than caves in southern Africa. So it's completely different context and probably much harder to interpret lifestyle from this setting.
All right. Well, I want to start off with a huge shout out to our classrooms who joined us today. You sent in such great questions. Definitely a lot of curiosity coming from our classes in Canada and the US. And Louise, we really appreciate, I know things are busy. You're getting ready to transition back to the big city. So I really appreciate you giving us some time and taking us out today.
That's great. Thank you so much. It's been really fun chatting to everybody. And we've got a little bit of rain here, amazingly. You can see, and the sun's about to go down.
Yeah, I see the
So
rain. Yeah.
it's really nice, taking the edge off the heat. So I'm looking forward to a nice cool evening. And thank you so much, Joe, for organizing this. And to everybody, thank you for joining in, and look forward to talking to you again next time from the field.
Perfect. Well, we hope to see classrooms joining us over the next few weeks with more of our paleontology, archaeology, and geology events. But for now, we're going to say goodbye. Hope everyone has a great rest of the week. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you, then. Bye-bye. Bye.